it's Chris Fleming. Welcome back to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. Now, our guest this month is a doctor of internal medicine in Wheaton, Illinois. After being awarded a degree in economics from Cornell College and serving with the Marine Corps Reserves, he completed his medical degree at the University of Illinois and graduated with honors. He interned with Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center and completed his residency at the Mayo Clinic. Now, after a miraculous experience where he was given divine knowledge that a patient needed a lung scan, which ultimately saved his patient's life, he became intrigued by the unexplained phenomenon many doctors see during their professional careers. He spent 3 years compiling this anthology of amazing occurrences and is now a published author sharing his stories, as well as other stories of doctors who have experienced dreams foretelling future events, apparitions, and other miraculous experiences with their patients. His book is titled Physicians' Untold Stories, Miraculous Experiences Doctors Are Hesitant to Share with Their Patients or Anyone. Now, he lives with his wife, Joan, and enjoys spending time with his 7 children and their families. He also loves to travel, fly kites, and support charities, including an orphanage in Romania. Now, please welcome to the show Dr. Scott Kolbaba. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Now, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I have to say this. You're practice medicine in Wheaton, Illinois, and that's not too far from me.
Actually, we grew up within miles of each other. It's really strange. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and that's what struck me because you don't hear too many doctors coming out and sharing these stories, and some of which you're going to share tonight, but you're local.
Yes, yeah. And, these are mostly local docs that I know personally. And I was surprised that they really share these amazing stories because, these are ordinary docs. These are not doctors that are practicing some strange kind of medicine. These are ordinary docs you go see for a broken leg or a heart attack or whatever. And they came forward and were bold enough to tell me these amazing stories that they could really be criticized for. Right. And they were a little concerned, I think, but there were 27 that came forward, and they've got some amazing stories.
That's fantastic because on this podcast, we're going to be discussing Scott's experiences of unexplained phenomena that go beyond any scientific or medical reasoning, and especially the entirety of this book. Now, let's get started. This book, Physicians' Untold Stories, you mentioned that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Now, how did the doctors demonstrate this, and you came to this conclusion?
Well, there are a number of stories that the doctors told me, and about how love can overcome the bounds of space, time, and eternity. And if you have time, I'd be glad to tell you an interesting story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. John Heitzler is one of the obstetricians in the community. He actually delivered our third son, and our third son is still walking and talking and alive and well. And he tells a story about his wife who was actually delivering their 5th child. And during the delivery, when you have an obstetrician, everyone kind of flutters around and wants to wants to do the right thing for the obstetrician, and his wife was delivering the baby. So there were 2 obstetricians in the room, there were 3 nurses in the room, and Joan, who is his wife, was delivering their 5th child. And during the delivery, Grandma O'Hanlon, who's Joan's grandmother, who was a midwife, came into the room and literally saved Joan's life, and then stepped out and went away. And the history of this is that Grandma O'Hanlon was initially born in Ireland. And in those times, there was a really a tough time in Ireland with the Protestants and the Catholics. And Joan's dad hid the priest in secret rooms in their house. And it was a dangerous time, so the father sent Joan's grandmother, Grandma O'Hanlon, away to Chicago to be in a safer place. She grew up there, became a midwife, and she was the spiritual leader for the family. She'd do things like when she went into Chicago to do some midwife services, she would give to some of the poor. And her friends would make fun of her, and they'd say, "Why are you giving money to the people on the street? They just spend it for alcohol." And Grandma O'Hanlon would say, God wants me to donate to the poor. What they do with their money is what they want to do with it. So Grandma Hanlon ultimately retired from this and lived with Joan's mother and Joan. This was Joan when Joan was a little girl. They loved each other a great deal. They bonded tremendously. And Joan would say whenever she got in trouble with her mom, if she could make it to Grandma Hanlon's lap, she'd be safe. Well, during the delivery, no one realized that Joan had a large meal right before she delivered the baby. And when she was starting to have some pain, in those days, they used to use Trilene, which is an anesthetic that you put over the mouth, and it puts a person to sleep. So Joan was about ready to accept the Trilene as an anesthetic and fall into a deep sleep. And Grandma Hanlon came into the room. She was dressed in a little sweater vest. She had a dress on that was typical for the time. She had little polka dots in the dress, old lady shoes, hair up in a bun. And she stood at the end of the bed and she signaled to Joan, "No, don't do this." She shook her head, "Don't take the Trilene." Well, Joan didn't initially understand, but then as soon as she saw Grandma Hanlon, she pushed the Trilene away and refused to use it. Well, anyway, in about a minute or two, Joan vomited everything that she had eaten before. Had she had the Trilene on and had she been under anesthetic, she would have very likely aspirated and she may have died. When Grandma Hanlon slipped out of the room, unseen by anyone else, Joan had made it to her lap one last time, was safe one last time. And the interesting thing about this, Chris, is that Grandma Hanlon had died 22 years before.
Wow.
Talk about love transcending all earthly bonds. And that's one of my favorite stories in the book. And it's really a moving story.
And the thing is people, miracles happen all the time. There's many different varying degrees of miracles, but most of these happen to be with someone, a loved one, coming back to assist them through either a hard time or through a choice, a decision. And that choice can go either one way. It can go to impending danger or it can go to opportunity. And she came to help assist with the free will of that choice.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. I just love that story. And Jack Heitzler is just an ordinary guy. I've never heard that story before.
Right.
And it's interesting when we got the docs together, the contributors, many of them said, I never realized that you did all this or that you had that experience, because they don't talk about this. They're afraid to share these stories.
Right. Well, you wrote this book, Physicians' Untold Stories, and it's miracles, experiences that doctors had that, a lot of them are afraid to share with their patients. How did you personally come to the conclusion that you had to write this book?
I had a few funny experiences myself, a few strange experiences that I just couldn't explain, that had to be divine intervention in a number of ways. And then I had a couple of those. And then I was out making rounds on the floor, and one of my colleagues, Dave Mokel, who's an orthopedic surgeon I know very well, came literally running up to me and grabbed me and said, "Scott, I've got to tell you the story." And I said, "Okay, tell me the story." And Dave said, "Well, I can't tell you right here. I don't want anyone to hear." I said, "Okay, well, what should we do?" And he said, "Well, let's go in the empty patient's room and I'll tell you." And he closed the door. And he said, I wanted to tell you about one of your patients that arrested when I was doing an operation. She flatlined. She was totally dead, eyes closed, heart stopped, no breathing. And it was caused from the antibiotic that was given to her in the operating room. Well, they were resuscitating her, and during the resuscitation effort, with the CPR, there was a guy that came in from when they do CPR and call an arrest in the operating room, everyone rushes in from the other operating rooms nearby. And there was this one tech that started to do CPR that had shockingly red hair. And he wasn't doing CPR adequately enough, so Dave Mokel told him to stop. I'll do it myself. And he didn't stop. And he did that a couple of times. And finally, Dave, in the heat of the battle, pushed him away. And he stumbled away, and Dave took over, Dr. Mokel, and did the CPR himself. Well, that saved her life. She came back, but didn't wake up till the next day. When she was leaving the hospital, Dave came to give her discharge instructions, and she said, "Thank you for saving my life." And Dave said, "Well, it was a team effort. We all kind of pitched in." And she said, No, I saw you. I saw you save my life. And Dave got a little weak-kneed and had to sit down by that point. And he said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I saw you push that guy with the red hair away, and I saw him stumble away. And I saw you looking at the door. And I saw you page Dr. Kolbaba. And he didn't come because he wasn't in the hospital. And I saw all the details that really couldn't be explained except that she was there." And she said, "I rose to the top of the room, It was an out-of-body experience, and I looked at everything that was happening at the time. And my grandmother, who had been dead, came to me and told me it wasn't my time to go. And by that time, you started to do CPR, and I came back. But I remember everything that was happening. Well, Dave, who's a very organized, scientific kind of a guy, was trying to explain that scientifically and just couldn't. And I said, Dave, who did you tell this story to? And he said, well, no one. They'll make fun of me. I said, Dave, I've got to record this story because I'm thinking about doing a book. And would you mind if I put this in the book? Well, he hesitated a little bit, but I think enough docs pitched in the stories that they all felt a little more comfortable about sharing these miraculous stories. So that was what got me initially started. And then I started talking with more doctors, and I realized lots of doctors have these amazing experiences that no one talks about.
Right.
And that's what I put in the book. There are lots of experiences, but the ones I put in the book either gave me goosebumps or made me cry. And if those are the criteria for admission for a good story.
Well, why do you think? I mean, you've got nearly 30 ordinary practicing physicians from all different specialties have come forward and risked their reputations with these amazing stories. Why?
I've done a lot of thinking about that because it didn't make any sense to me, because why would they want to do this? And I think I came up with a couple reasons. One is I think they trust me. I've been around for a long time. I've got lots of gray hairs. They know what kind of a doc I am. And so I think that was one of the reasons. But I think the real reason is that docs in general are do-gooders. And in the book, I call them sappy do-gooders. And I think what they wanted to achieve was they wanted people to know that there's something else out there, that there's, you can call it a God, you can call it a force, you can call it a universal force, but they wanted everyone that read this book to know that they knew that there was something else that intervened in their life, that loved them unconditionally and participated in their lives, and that I think they wanted to give people hope that they could look for something that participates in their life too.
Absolutely. And, I got to back up here because I've dealt with a lot of doctors in my life, from being sick or from my car accident and stuff.
Sure.
And most doctors, as soon as you start to talk about spiritual or supernatural stuff, they kind of like bring you right back to science and medicine, exactly. Right? I mean, I do have a couple doctors, don't get me wrong, that we have discussed certain things, and especially one of my brain injury doctors at Rush, Dr. Young, and we've discussed a few things about some interesting things that can't be explained.
Yes. Yes.
And then I have some therapists that we've discussed these things. But then there's some doctors just bring it right back. Okay, won't go there.
It's a scary thing to talk about these things, and doctors don't want to admit that they have that they've had some of these experiences, and they don't want to be criticized. Doctors can be subject to great criticism, and my editor in reading this book said these are noble doctors for coming forward with these stories that I don't know of any book that has this kind of story from a doctor before. And
did you have any doctors though that talked about dreams that came true or messages in their dreams?
Absolutely. There were a number of doctors that talked about dreams, and one of the doctors, and it's there's some interesting coincidences in this story, and one of those is the doctor was talking to a friend who was kind of a 70s hippie type, and she was telling him that when you have a dream, you have to tell the person that you dreamed about, because that's the way the Earth operates. Yeah. And so he listened to that and kind of took that in and couldn't remember any dreams that he had. But one night, after a busy day, he had a phenomenal dream. He dreamt that one of his good friends, Mike Glasso, who was actually a very prominent judge in the area, had died of a heart attack, and he saw him in a coffin in a funeral home. And it was a vivid dream. It was just the kind of dream that, when you wake up, usually when you have a dream, the dream will be with you for a few seconds, then you'll forget about it. Well, this dream stuck with him. And he remembered this telling the person you dreamt about statement. And so the next day, or that same day, I should say, he called up Judge Glasso and he said, Judge, I had this dream about you, and I dreamt that you died, and the judge kind of laughed and said, that's really a crazy dream, Rich, get on with your life here. and Rich Jorgensen said, no, I really, it moved me so much that you have to get a physical. Just go humor me and get a physical. Well, the judge hadn't had a physical for a long time, so he went and got a physical. And the guy that did the physical, who I know and Dr. Jorgensen knows, did a complete job, nothing wrong with him, totally healthy, did an EKG, chest x-ray, everything, and told him that don't listen to this crazy surgeon, Dr. Jorgensen, anymore because you're fine. But Dr. Jorgensen didn't accept that. He still felt this dream was so vivid and so real that he said to the judge, go to my cardiologist. I dreamt it was a cardiology problem. And, he was really sticking his neck out here, to tell his friend that. So he did see his cardiologist. His cardiologist did some tests and a stress test, which he flunked badly. He was put right in the hospital. They did an angiogram. The angiogram showed what's called a widowmaker, plus lots of other coronary lesions that would result in his death within probably months, is the usual life expectancy for a widowmaker. And they did the bypass surgery the next day because they were afraid if they waited another day, he might have a fatal heart attack and die. He lived. He went on and lived, practiced for a number of years, and retired, and moved to Florida, where Rich spent many days playing golf with him. But the interesting thing is that the dream was so vivid that he had to tell him.
Yeah, you get dreams, precognitive dreams, that tell you something is going to happen. They're messages, warnings. And you can also get visions, things that will just pop into your head no matter where you're at. You could be sitting at a desk, you're in a car, get a warning like put your seatbelt on. You see a car accident, all of a sudden a car accident unfolds in front of you. Mm-hmm. And the thing is to listen to this. Are you going to listen to it, not listen to it? I mean, we've got, Napoleon Hill, a great motivational speaker, back in the 1900s, passed away in 1970, wrote in 1930s that there is infinite knowledge. There is this sixth sense that will warn you of impending danger or opportunity. And this type of thing has existed since the beginning of time. And it's important, like for your colleagues and stuff, to talk about this because these messages can come to anyone. The question is do you listen to them?
Well, that's what the doctors wanted to get. That's one of the reasons the doctors came forward with these stories. They wanted people to realize that they are being bombarded with messages, and amazing things happen to us all the time, and little things happen to us, little coincidences, and then some of these big coincidences. But some of the things that moved the doctors were like sometimes a voice whispers to you, do this, do that. This was a shout, for Dr. Right. Jorgensen. Some of these things that came to these doctors was almost like someone shouting to them, you need to do this. And there's a interesting story about Dr. Heim, who's an orthopedic surgeon also, was skiing in Colorado. And when he got up to the top he's an expert skier, and he goes to these back mountains that are craggy and rugged, and he likes to challenge himself. Well, he got on top of this one mountain with his wife and his wife's sister, and they decided to ski down, but the blizzard hit at the time. So the temperature dropped about 40 degrees. The snow was coming down sideways, upside down, all directions, but they had to ski down. Now, in skiing down, they could hardly see, 10 feet in front of them. And they came to a grove of trees right in the middle of their path, and they had to go to the right or the left. And Dr. Heim decided to go to the right, and the girls decided to go to the left. And as soon as Steve realized that, he decided to ski back through the grove of trees. Well, as he's doing that, this is 5 feet of powder snow. He's an expert skier. It's not a problem for him at all. But all of a sudden, things became quiet. They became silent, despite the wind whistling around and the snow coming down. He could hear himself breathe. He could hear his skis against the snow, and he decided to stop. He had no idea why he stopped right in the middle of this forest. And when the girls were waiting for him on the other side, he took off his skis, and then he had this strong feeling like someone shouting at him, I've got to climb up the mountain. So he climbed up the mountain. He's going in the opposite direction from where the girls are waiting for him. So he's climbing and walking and climbing. In the meantime, everything's quiet. He can hear himself breathe. He can hear the crunch of the shoes against the cold snow. It's getting colder and colder. There's more and more snow coming down. He comes to a big pine tree, because there's all pine trees in this forest. And when it snows and there's 5 feet of snow, the snow comes down to the base of the tree. That's called a tree well. And he was in front of this one very large tree, and he happened to look down, and then he knew why he was there. There was a body under the tree covered with snow.
Oh, my God.
He brushed the snow off the body, and Steve also was a trauma surgeon. So he knew exactly what to do. What better person to come across the body in the middle of the woods than a trauma surgeon? Okay, so he brushed off his face. The guy's got a gray face. He looks like he's dead, and Steve thinks he's dead. But he knows what to do. He reached down for the carotid artery. He had a thready pulse, but he had a pulse. He was alive. So Steve went into the trauma mode. He put him with his head down. He brushed all the snow off, took off his jackets, covered with his jackets, started to yell, "Help, help, help." In the meantime, one of the last skiers coming down the mountain happened to hear him and came to his side and said, "What can I do?" And he said, "Well, go down to the nearest phone or go down to the lodge and call the ski patrol. Get him up here as soon as possible. This guy's ready to die. He's hypothermic. He's in shock. He's unconscious." So about 20 minutes later, he saw the light from the snowmobile coming up with a gurney being pulled out behind him. And they picked the guy up, who Steve also had splinted his broken leg with a tree branch and some of his clothing. Because he was an orthopedic surgeon. He knew how to splint a broken leg. So they picked this guy up, brought him down to the lodge. The ambulance was waiting there, took him off to the hospital. And the next day, Steve found out that the guy lived. The orthopedic surgeons were actually very impressed with the way he splinted the leg with a tree branch in his clothing. And the guy was fine. And had he not been found at that time, he wouldn't have been found till the spring because the snow was coming down. He'd been totally covered under the tree. So
that is just miraculous. I mean, how did you and the doctors recognize this universal force, this voice that has helped you and other doctors to make decision in your practices?
Sometimes the voices are loud, like this with Steve Heim and Rich Jorgensen. I mean, those were voices that they could not do anything other than that. I mean, they were just so driven. But there are other times when there's a little voice, okay? And my partner, John Bourne, talks a lot about this, and he's in the book also. And he does a lot of pre-op clearing of patients for orthopedic surgeries and total joints and so forth. And he had one patient that he cleared, and he kept hearing this little thing in the back of his head: "This guy needs a stress test. This guy needs a stress test. You need to do a stress test." And John's begun to recognize when he hears that, he never ignores it because it's always true. So he did the stress test on the guy, and sure enough, he failed it badly and needed to have bypass surgery before he went to surgery. Had he gone to surgery, he might have died in surgery because of the stress of the surgery. So he routinely and it's not a loud voice like the Steve Heim story. This is a quiet little voice. So you have to be attuned to these things. You have to be ready to accept this and listen to those little voices. And I think that's one of the things that John wanted people to realize, that when you hear something like that, you listen to it, because and he said it's always true. It always saves me, and it helps. He looks forward to this to help him in his practice. And other doctors have learned that to listen to these kinds of promptings, or whatever you call them, so that they can use that in their practice, and it helps them, and they count on it. They've gotten to the point where they count on having someone else that's above them. And some call it God, some call it a universal force. I've got some very devout doctors here, and some doctors that don't go to church or don't practice a religion at all, that still recognize this voice, this force.
Some people have to be open to it. That's the thing.
I think so.
You have to be aware that it's there. You have to honor it, and then also acknowledge it, but then also give gratitude after it, because then you establish that communication.
I think they do. And they recognize that something else has been helping them, and they appreciate it, because it saved Dr. Bourne's neck a number of times, and mine too. We've learned to recognize there's something else out there that helps us.
Right. Now, you mentioned that one of the doctors, when in training, always had this like fluttering light, either in a dream or during the day when someone on their service was going to die. Can you tell us about that story?
Yeah, that was Noemi Sigalov, who's a general surgeon. And, it was uncanny in her residency. And when you're in the residency, you're in a major medical center where you're dealing with people that are really, really sick, okay? And people die not uncommonly, quite commonly in those circumstances where people have major accidents or major illnesses. And she'd get a fluttering, like a fluttering light, like feathers fluttering around in a peripheral vision. And invariably that day, someone would die. And she'd get a sick feeling when she'd get that, because she knew what would happen. And she'd go into the rounds in the morning and she'd say to the other interns or residents that I had that feeling again. And everyone would say, "Oh, no, you didn't. Why did you tell us?" because invariably someone would die with that. And she didn't know why it was that she had that, but that was her premonition that someone would die that day.
I wonder if that would be her ability to see a spirit that was there ready to assist someone that was going to die, because we have a lot of situations where when someone's close to death or they're going to be dying within a few days, hours, weeks, or even months, they tend to see loved ones, relatives coming to them to prepare them for that transition. So the question is with these white lights, which I've come to know is a lot of these white lights tend to be higher spirits, more enlightened spirits. And if they're showing up prior to someone's death, maybe these lights are there to welcome that person as they transition out of the body, and this doctor is witnessing it.
Well, we've had a number of doctors talk about that very thing. One doctor, Dr. John Saran, who's a doctor that actually delivered a baby on an airplane once. I can tell you about that later. Wow. But he had a friend, a neighbor actually, who was dying. And the gentleman was relatively young, was dying of colon cancer, and he was with his wife. And by this point, he couldn't walk very well, and he was confined to a bed in the living room. And he said to his wife, "What are those people? What are those girls doing dancing in the living room?" He saw 3 girls dancing in the living room, dancing in a circle, happy and smiling, and she didn't see them obviously, but she was attuned enough to what was going on. She said, "John, those are spirits that have come to welcome you and help you to leave the earth, angels that will help you." And then he said, "Okay," and he knew he was very close. He said, "Okay, I'll take care of things on the other side." He's a very responsible guy. "I'll take care of things on the other side if you take care of things on the earth." And she said, I'd be glad to. He closed his eyes and he died. And I'm sure those angels, those spirits, took him back to where he was going.
So your book contains these stories and much more. How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, Chris, it started out as a 6-month project. I thought, I'll just talk to some doctors, get some stories. I've got a few now. I thought I'll do this in 6 months. Well, that was crazy. I've never written a book before. This is my first book, and it took about 3.5 years to finish the book. So lots of stuff. But you've written some books.
I'm working on it now, and it's taking longer than I thought.
It always does. You have editors, you have lawyers, you have everyone gets it
right.
Yeah. The editing, the rewriting. My wife was my first editor. Okay, so I'd take the story and I'd show it to her and say, "Joan, what do you think of this?" And I think it would be a great story. And she said, "You can do better." So I go back to my computer, do some more writing, rewrite it. Yeah. I think most of the stories were rewritten about 15 or 20 times before I got the true essence of the story. So.
Doctor, I got that with my mom because, some of the stories she was around that time and experiences with her. She was like, "That's not what happened. This person was with us too." Right. Or we went here first or this. I'm like, okay, fine. Tell me. I'll put it in there. Exactly. I'm double checking.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now, did you have any unexplained experiences that helped you in writing this book? Inspired you at all?
Yeah. There were a couple that I had. I think, let's see, probably the best one was what happened to me on a vacation. And we have 7 kids. I'm not sure where they all came from, but I've got 7 kids. And we love to go on vacations, all right? So one of our favorite places is Cape Cod. So this one particular time, this happened before I got involved with the book, and this, I think, was one of the things that led me to thinking about a book like this. And, there are some times when we love our family. We think families are really, really important. And this was a special family time. The guys were cooking dinner, and we had, stuff that we normally don't eat. We had swordfish steaks, we had corn on the cob, we had lots of wonderful Cape Cod stuff. And at the same time, the little kids were running around collecting bugs in the yard, and the girls were laughing and talking, and the boys with their scruffy beards, because we had a beard growing contest, were cooking because the guys were cooking that night. And we went to the store. We bought some pies. We bought, I think, 4 or 5 cherry pies. And while we were doing that, we started talking about my mother, who had passed, and how she used to make rhubarb pie because we had a rhubarb plant in our backyard. And she made the best sweet rhubarb pie. And when my kids came along, we started to go up to their house and in the fall, and we'd sneak into the kitchen with spoons, and we'd each, go after the rhubarb pie with our spoons, and wouldn't even have a plate or anything. We'd just go right at the dish and eat the rhubarb pie, and we loved it so much. We talked about that night. Wouldn't it be special if my mother could be here to witness this incredible, beautiful night where everyone's getting together and having a wonderful time, the sun setting, and everything was just a perfect night, a night that you couldn't reproduce ever again. And I said, wouldn't it? I bet you'd make us rhubarb pie tonight. I kept saying, and it was kind of just a special night. We finished the dinner. My wife was passing out the cherry pie, and I took a bite, and suddenly goosebumps went up and down my spine because the cherry pie wasn't cherry, it was rhubarb. I looked at the box, and the box said cherry pie, but it was a rhubarb pie.
Holy cow.
Now, you can certainly imagine, maybe at the bakery, somebody put a rhubarb pie in a cherry box, or, there's all kinds of explanations for something like that. But my explanation was that night my mother was sharing a special evening with us.
Oh, absolutely.
So that kind of got me thinking about some spiritual things and wanting to share them with others. And when some of the doctors came forward with these amazing stories, I thought this is my opportunity to let people know there's something else out there.
Absolutely. Now, in your profession and in many of the doctors you work with, it's normal to witness prayer. Prayer from family or loved ones hoping that the person gets better, especially if they're in the hospital dying. But then also, I know doctors even told me that they've even said prayers for their patients and to assist them. Can you tell me, is any experiences with prayer you've run into or that's in your book or some of the doctors that you relate with?
Yeah, a lot of doctors do believe in prayer, but they don't tell anyone that. And one of the most spectacular occurrences that I've come across is from Dave Geezer. David, you've been to Wheaton College?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Dave's the chairman of the board at Wheaton College. He's also an ophthalmologist. And he said one of the things that got him that increased his faith was an experience he had as a high schooler. He was playing soccer, and he was the goalie. And this one particular game, he was really going at it intensively because he wasn't playing very well before that. So the ball was coming toward him. He jumped and leaped toward the ball just as another player was kicking the ball, and he kicked him right in the flank as hard as he could. Dave had excruciating pain, hobbled his way back, and ended up at home. His mom took him right to the hospital, and it turns out he had a ruptured kidney. So he was laying in bed at the time. Urologist came to see him. He was, urinating blood all the time, severe pain, required Demerol, which was the drug of choice at that time, to help with his pain. And he was in so much pain he couldn't even watch TV, so he just was watching the clock. He'd lay there all in the morning and watch the clock. And this particular Friday, he was watching the clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. All of a sudden, at 10 o'clock, he moved around, and there was no pain. And he was a little afraid to do anything else, but he wanted to test it, so he sat up, no pain. And then the pain was no blood in the urine, no pain. Started to get up out of the bed, walked around, no pain. The pain was totally gone. 1 minute, the pain was there. The next minute was completely gone. They discharged him from the hospital. They kept him, at home for a little while longer. And finally he went back to school. And one of his teachers that he loved very much, and he had a special relationship, talk about love. He had a special relationship with this one teacher. The teacher said, "Oh, Dave, we're so glad you're back. We were so worried about you, and we were so worried that on that Friday at passing period at 10 o'clock, we said a faculty prayer that you'd get better." It was 10 o'clock on Friday. And Dave just had goosebumps, and he knew that that prayer had saved his kidney and saved his life, because they were planning on taking the kidney out within a couple of days of that.
Absolutely.
So
it's just wonderful. And I want to add something to that. And I know a lot of the listeners have listened to some of our past podcasts, and I brought up prayer, which I think goes exactly aligned with what you're saying in regards to an experience over a year ago when I was in Costa Rica. I had a feeling something was going to happen. And when I said goodbye to I went and saw my mom before I went on my trip. I said, "Mom, don't die on me." And she's like, "What?" I said, "I just got this feeling." She was like, "Oh, you're going to be gone for like 7 days. I'll be fine." Well, I gave her a hug and told her I loved her. And I said, don't leave me. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And she thought it was odd and weird, didn't think anything else. While I'm on the trip, I turned off my cell phone service, but I had Wi-Fi, and I said, you know what, I'm going to contact my sister, let her know where I'm at. She doesn't know I'm out of town.
Yeah.
I contact her, said, hey, the only way you can get hold of me is through text message, so send me a text if you need anything.
Mm-hmm.
The very last day that I was in Costa Rica, I get a message from her in the morning saying, call me right away, ASAP. So I call her. She says, listen to me very carefully. I'm like, what? What's wrong? She goes, there is nothing you can do. I go, do about what? Come on, what's going on? She goes, Mom just went into the hospital, emergency surgery. She has 2 blood clots, okay? They're going to operate right away to see if they can save her. It doesn't look good. And I'm like, oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God. And I'm sitting there, I'm like in Costa Rica. I can't go anywhere. My flight doesn't leave until the next day, 2 in the morning. You know, I can't get an earlier flight. I mean, I could try, but it's not going to make much of a difference. So my sister says, I'll call you after surgery to let you know what happens, but just don't get your expectations up. And I said, you know what? I know I can do something. So I went back to my room. Then I went right to the ocean, got into the ocean. The sun's beautiful. The water's there. There's no other place I would rather be at that precise moment to where there's no distractions. And I started praying. And I looked up to God. I cried. I let all the emotion. I said, you can't do this to me. I need my mom in my life. You can't take her away in this type of a situation where I'm not there by her side. I want to be by her side. And then, so I prayed. And then I surrendered. And then I went back into my room, went on my phone, went on social media, on Facebook, told everybody, I go, I've always been there for everybody else, blah, blah, blah. Now I need you. Here's the situation. My mom's going, blah, blah, blah. Please pray for her. Within an hour, there was 300 comments, all of prayer. Within 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, there was 500 likes. Oh. Okay? All these people praying. Because I said, I knew I can do something. And I'm going to pray. Yeah. And I'm going to get everybody I know that can listen to me to pray too. 4 or 5 hours later, I get a phone call from my stepdad. He says, you're not going to believe it. I go, what? She's okay. And I said, he goes, it's a miracle. I said, why do you say a miracle? He goes, like, well, they found 2 other blood clots. They were in her lungs, too. So she had 4 blood clots. All the doctors say there's no way she should have survived this. Even your mother came out of this. First thing she says, I'm not supposed to be here. She goes, but I'm here. I felt a calling that I needed to come back. And then when I talked to her on the phone, she's saying the same thing. First thing she says, I'm not supposed to be here right now, but I felt that I needed to come back. And I said, oh my God, Mom. I had all these people. She goes, well, I must have heard them because I came back.
That's cool. That happens. Yeah, that happens. There's a power in prayer, and there's a power I'm convinced in lots of people praying. I think that's even more powerful. There's a couple stories from the doctors about that, and let me tell you the one about an individual, the doctor that was in the Philippines, and he was. They go there on mission trips. You know, these doctors. Many of these doctors are just, like I said, sappy do-gooders. So he goes there for a week and does free operations all week. And you know, this is an 8-bed hospital. It's out in the boonies. There's no blood bank. There's nothing. He just has a couple techs that aren't even nurses that help him with the surgery. So he has a lady with a huge uterus from fibroids who is really uncomfortable and looks like she's pregnant. So he's doing an operation on her. And one of the things that you have to do, evidently, when you do an operation like this is you have to tie off the blood vessels that go to the uterus that you're taking out. And when he got in, he discovered that everything was socked in with scar tissue. And he couldn't lift the uterus up to get to the blood vessels underneath. And the woman started to bleed more and more and more. And he was cauterizing each bleeder. But eventually, there were so many bleeders that came up, he couldn't keep track of it. And she started to bleed uncontrollably. And he didn't know what to do. And suddenly, everyone in the operating room, when this happens, gets very quiet. And no one makes eye contact. And it's a really eerie situation. And everyone knows she's bleeding literally to death. And the surgeon is standing there thinking, there's a blood bank 25 miles away. I'll never get to it. I've got a bunch of techs here that aren't even nurses. And what am I going to do? And he closed his eyes and he prayed, Heavenly Father, please, you're the master healer. Take over my operation. Amen. And he opened his eyes to the bright lights of the operating room. He looked down. He was able to lift the uterus easily off. The scar tissue seemed to melt away. He tied off the bleeders, and she survived. Wow. So there's a power in prayer, and he discovered that night in a far off little hospital in the Philippines.
Yeah, I started getting a little teary-eyed when I was hearing this because I understand the connection that we all have, but that sometimes we forget we have. Now, you also talk about, besides miracles and prayers and near-death experiences, you talk about coincidences. It seems to be a major topic in the book. Can you tell us about some of the coincidences you or some of the doctors had, and what did you learn about this when you were writing this book regarding coincidences?
Well, there are lots of coincidences that happen, and I think that's how this force or God, I think, helps us. And there are a number of coincidences in writing the book. For example, I just mentioned a few. I was looking for, when you write a book, you don't know what you're doing, so you need someone like an agent or someone to help you. What do I do now? I've written some stories. Do I go to an agent? Do I go to a publisher? What do I do? And so I was looking, and I was looking at Ben Carson because I thought Ben Carson would be a great one to provide a story for my book. And so I looked under a website with Ben Carson, and I'm scrolling down, and all of a sudden I come to a face. And I said, I know that face. I know that face from somewhere. And this is Ben Carson's publisher, okay, the president of the publishing company. And I said, where do I know that face from? It's a patient of mine. This is a patient of mine that I had taken care of in the past. And I recognized him right away. And I got on the phone, and I called him up, and I said, his name is Scott. I said, Scott, I'd like to meet with you for lunch. And tell you some stories. He said, I'd love to meet with you. So we met. He had by that time, he had left the publishing house that he was president of. And he met with me, and he said, these are phenomenal stories. You have to publish this. Let me help you. And he's been my acting agent pretty much the whole time and helping me throughout this. And what a coincidence that I'd be looking at a Ben Carson site, see the guy that I needed to have help me at that time that saw me through the whole process and was invaluable. I couldn't have done this without him. And it just was a coincidence, quote, coincidence, that I happened to bump into him on that site.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. I want to go off into left field here for a second.
Sure. We're in left field already.
That's right. We're going to cover the entire outfield here. And this is probably going to throw some of the listeners for a loop here. Do you think the rain delay in the last Cubs game to win the World Series came from above?
My wife is really was really kind of emotional about this whole Cubs thing because, and I think many of us have lived through this, where our parents were in diehard Cubs fans, and her parents watched the Cubs throughout all their losses for years and years. They loved the Cubs, and they've since passed on. And my wife, when the Cubs started winning, became emotional, and she'd shed a tear because this was like a spiritual experience to her that the Cubs were winning, and she connected with her parents because they would have loved this so much. So, you really wonder, there's probably so many prayers and so much going out, for the Cubs to win that, it's silly to think about, but
right.
You certainly wonder, that was a crazy rain delay, and the Cubs came. I thought they were going to lose before the rain delay, and then they came back and they won. So I don't know. I can't say, but I know.
Well, I have to say this.
Emotional.
When they did the statistics, who wanted people all over the United States and even in other countries, who they wanted to win, it was the Cubs.
Yeah.
And so you look at everybody's consciousness was focusing on the Cubs. And I remember when it was 6-6, when it was tied, and I was seeing the faces of some of the Cubs players, and I was projecting consciousness. I said, come on, guys, believe. Forget what the score is. Just believe in yourself. Believe in your team. That's all you have to do. Just believe. Mm-hmm. And then we all know what happened.
Yeah.
And they won. And it was like a miracle occurred. Because, you got 108 years with them not winning. You got this curse that finally has been lifted, and you had them believe, which overcame that curse. They just believed.
There was something strange that happened with that rain delay, and I think it was that they believed. And I think, though, there's a power in believing. A power in believing that you can do something.
So we all witnessed the miracle.
The Cubs.
The Cubs. Now, your book's filled with many miracles, which doctors consider miracles. Now, have you and the other doctors now have an expectation that miracles can occur in the future in your practice and the lives of your patients?
Yeah, I think this book and having the doctors get together and share these stories with each other has raised a consciousness in our community about miracles. And I think more and more doctors now are accepting that voice that they hear, or not literally, but the feeling that they have, and they're more attuned to that feeling. And I think people are almost in many cases, do expect miracles. My partner, John Bourne, when he pre-ops someone, well, like I said, sometimes we'll get some inside information that he doesn't know where it came from, and he now looks forward to that and expects it in many cases. And I think more and more doctors are using that power, that force, that creator that guides us, and using that to in their practice for good.
Oh yeah, and I just got this idea listening to you. Is there's an awareness, and when there's an awareness, our perception begins to change. So I'm asking all my listeners to do this. This is very important because it just hit me, and I've been writing this down after I've been talking here with Dr. Kolbaba. Go out there and get the book, Physicians' Untold Stories. Now, you can get it on Amazon.com, or you can go to Scott's website, which is physiciansuntoldsstories.com. That's physiciansuntoldsstories.com. Pick up the book, not only for yourself, but get a copy of the book for your doctor, for your favorite doctor. I just wrote down, I'm going to get 4 books because I have 4 doctors I've been working with because of my car crash, my injuries, TBI. They know what I do, but I want to get this book for them for Christmas, for the holidays, and write something special in there because they've been working with me for 3-4 years, and I want to thank them and tell them that here's something that I think you may enjoy. What that will do is that will enlighten them and open them up to the possibilities as well as the awareness that miracles work and these things do occur, which will slowly start to assist them and help them in their own practice with the patients they're dealing with. And I think everybody listening knows exactly where this is going. So I think we have a responsibility as listeners to not just listen to this podcast, but go out and get the book. Not only go get the book, but get an additional copy and give it to our doctors. Give it to our doctors because the universe will then work with them it's now in their hands. They may not read it right away, but the universe is going to have something happen that's going to cause that doctor to pick up that book. Once he picks up that book, he's going to start reading, and it's going to affect him. And when it affects him, imagine how that ripple will begin to affect not only him, but his staff, his patients, and so on. And that's how the universe gets to all of us, by us sharing that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. And we've got some more time here to talk about some other stuff. Now, you had a near accident in Iowa.
Yeah.
Was this divine intervention?
Well, it was a funny accident. We were traveling on a back road near the Amana colonies in Iowa, and I was with my whole family, and we were driving along a country road, and a car that was in a great hurry passed us, and they were to our left. On the right-hand side, there was no shoulder. It was just a steep embankment down. And when the car passed us, I saw a farmer pulling out way in front of us with a tractor and a hay wagon. And I thought, that car is going to hit that tractor. And I've got to slow down and get out of the way and slow down and keep away from hitting this car, having this car hit me, because there's going to be a major accident. Well, all of a sudden, things started to go in slow motion. And it was the most bizarre thing that I've ever experienced. I was going about 60 miles an hour, trying to slow down, and I could stay within inches of the car to my left who was passing us, and inches away from the embankment, rolling down the embankment on the right-hand side. And that went on for about, maybe 30 or 40 seconds. And then the car to our left hit the farmer and the tractor and the hay wagon. We were able to go around it because I could see exactly how to do that. And everything was, again, in such slow motion that it was easy for me to do that. And then after the whole thing happened, I went back to my real time, shaking, like a leaf. But I think there was something more that I think something one of the universal force, God, whatever you want to call it, was trying to help us and save us from that accident. We were totally unharmed. The other car was badly damaged. The people were hurt. The farmer was hurt badly. But we were totally unharmed and could help everyone out. So it was amazing.
And the universe had plans for you. That's why.
I guess so.
And that's what happens to a lot of people is, the universe on your path, your destiny, you have things you're supposed to do. And when these situations occur, they will jump in and they will guide you. They will shout at you. They will yell at you. They will throw things into your head for you to react so that your free will decision is accurate so you can complete your purpose, because it's a greater purpose that's going to affect a lot of people, as everybody could understand with what you're doing with this book. Now, what would you consider the main themes of this book? And it is strange that a book takes on a life of its own. I mean, some of the themes involved are the existence of a force that many doctors, like you've stated, call God or a higher power than even our mortal selves or our own judgment. There's something else going on here. And you also state that love is one of the most powerful forces in the universe that connects people across time, space, and eternity. And we've discussed that coincidences are not often coincidental, that people who have passed sometimes still participate in our lives, and that when someone wants something bad enough and works to achieve a goal, then they're helped in this quest by a higher force, often in incredible ways, such as helping others in their daily goals and doing what's actually going to benefit them. We can help them with that. Miracles happen regularly, and we should expect them and count them, and we can go on and on. There are so many perspectives and positive messages in this book. I don't even know where I'm going with this because I don't think I can even focus on one.
Well, I think, this gives people hope. This is a tough life. I mean, we're having some tough times now, and I think this gives people hope that something out there loves us, that participates in our life, that when we're out to do some major thing in our lives, that this force, this God, loves us enough to help us, and we can count on that help. I'll give you an example. For example, I was trying to get into medical school, and I wasn't the best student in college. I was kind of a B student, and I was an okay student, but I really didn't have a direction. I was an economics major. When I got out of the college, I decided after getting a real job, I really wanted to go back to medical school. And by that point, I had a wife, I had a child, and I only had 1 year that I could spare to prepare and get into medical school. And that 1 year, I had to get my prerequisites, and one of those was organic chemistry. Well, I was working a full-time job, so I had to take organic chemistry at nighttime. And so there was two schools in the Chicagoland area, Roosevelt University downtown, which is 70 miles from where I lived, and Aurora University, which is where I worked. And I thought, this is great. I work in Aurora. I can take organic chemistry at nighttime. If I get through this class, then I can go into medical school. If I don't, then I have to get stay on a regular job and not pursue my dreams. So I got to the first class at Aurora University, and there were 3 students in there. And I thought, this is great because I'll have a great time with my professor. I'll be able to do some personal attention. And the professor walks in that first night and says, I've got bad news. The class is canceled. There aren't enough students in the class. So I thought, oh, no, my career, my life is over. I'll never achieve my success. I'll never become a doctor. And then I realized I'll go down to Roosevelt and enroll there. So the next day I made some lame excuse to my boss. I zipped down to Roosevelt University, got in line, was waiting for the registrar, and I finally got to the front of the line. I said, I'd like to enroll in organic chemistry, thinking it's not going to be a problem. I had my checkbook out. And she said, I'm sorry, the class, we have 1 full class. We opened up a second class. Now we have 10 students waiting to get in, and we're not going to open up another class. I'm sorry, you can't enroll. And I said, oh, you don't understand. If I don't do this, I'll be a failure in life. I won't be a doctor. I need to get it this year, and so forth. And she said, I'm very sorry. Every one of those 10 students that wants to get in the class has the same story that you do. I said, oh, I've got to do something. What can I do? And she said, well, the only person that can let you in the class is the professor. And then I said, well, where's the professor? She said, the 3rd floor, room 302. So I went up the stairs. I got to the room. The room's full of students with the same idea that I'm doing, wanting to talk with the professor. I must have looked like a sad sack or something. There was something, out to help me. And I went to the secretary and I said, I've got to talk to the professor. This is my life flashing in front of me. And I must have looked like such a sad sack that she said, okay, you can wait in the anteroom. The 2 professors that are teaching the class are meeting together in the professor's room right now. You can wait in the anteroom. If you just take a minute, then no one else will be too mad at you. I got a bunch of dirty looks as I walked up there. And I waited in the anteroom. Now, the door in the professor's office was like paper thin, and I could hear everything that was going on. And the one professor said to the other one, I don't know what we're going to do. the class starts tomorrow. We have no books for the second class. We called the publisher. We called all the schools around us. There are no books. I'm thinking to myself, Royal University has books falling off the shelves. There were so many books left over. And so the professors are talking. And finally the one left, and they're in a tither about what to do with this book situation because they have no books for the second class at all. So I walk in and I said, my name is Scott Kolbaba. I want to go to medical school, and I can't get in unless I get organic chemistry and so forth. And he looked very bored and said, we've got 2 classes that are filled. The same story I got from downstairs, that there are 10 students in the waiting list. And he shook my hand and said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And I started to walk out, and then I thought to myself, I've got an idea. Lightning struck my head, okay?
Right.
These are desperate times and called for desperate measures. So I said to the professor, I turned around and I said, if I can get your books, will you let me in the class? And his eyes suddenly opened up, and his eyebrows went up. And he said, and then my heart was pounding, I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, because this is my life in front of me here. And he said, can you get 30? And I said, more. And then my heart's in my throat by this point, and it's pounding like crazy. He looks up to me and says, you're in. I did it. I got into the class.
That's awesome.
I told them where the books were. They got the books. Everyone was happy. And what coincidence is that? Where I happened to be in the right place when these 2 professors were talking. How likely is that to happen?
Right.
I mean, that's so. I thought it was a coincidence until I wrote the book. Then I realized this is more than a coincidence. To be in that one spot where I could help them and they could help me, and we're the only ones that could help each other. I mean, that was divine intervention for them and for me both. And I went on and got into medical school, and it's history.
The universe knew you both had needs, and you could fulfill each other's needs, and they brought you together.
And I think when you're involved with a worthwhile cause, something out there, the force you're talking about, God, participates and helps you. And I think that's true for any good cause. I think people need to look for that help that they get whenever they're involved with a worthwhile activity, and count on some help when they're really in trouble, because they'll get help. There's no question in my mind.
When people read your book, Physicians' Untold Stories, do they ever discover that the miracles in their own lives that they not realized before?
All the time. It's so gratifying to have people say, I read your book, and then I realized that what I had happened to me was not a coincidence either. One of my patients, I like to tell these stories to my patients. I'm always behind in my office hours because I tell stories. And so I was talking to one of my patients, and he said, well, I had a funny experience the other day. My daughter was trying to get an internship in New York City, and she applied and got in. It was a 3-month internship, but she was going to have to give it up because she couldn't find an apartment to live in New York City that was reasonable. They're all incredibly expensive. And he said, I didn't know what to do because I couldn't afford an apartment for 3 months in New York, and so she was going to have to give up her internship. So he said, that night I had a dream. I had a dream about an old friend that I knew 10 years ago that I hadn't talked with for years and years and years. And it was just a casual conversation. And the next morning, when I woke up, he called me on the phone. I hadn't talked with him for 10 years, and he said, I just wanted to touch bases with you. I had a feeling that I needed to call you. And I wanted to tell you about what's happened to me. And he said, I've been of great success in my life. I live in New York City right now. I've made a lot of money. I'm retired. I have a 3-bedroom apartment in the heart of New York City. No one lives with me, and I'm really lonely. And my patient said, well, my daughter's looking for an apartment in New York City. Would you mind if she stayed with you? And he said, no, I'd love it. Have her give me a call right away. She can stay with me as long as she wants. I'll feed her, and it'll be she can have a bedroom of all of her own. It'll be a great opportunity for me to connect with you again and talk with her, and so it worked out. And he said, I thought that was a coincidence, but now after hearing your stories and reading your book, I know it's not a coincidence. That was a divine intervention. That was something that happened because she was involved with a worthwhile activity, and that was God helping her do her activity, do her thing.
That's a fantastic story. Now, this book, is this your first book, or are there more that are coming out?
This is my first book. So far, the feedback on the book is really positive. I'm very encouraged.
Yeah.
And if this becomes a success, then other books will follow. And the next book, I think, will be Nurses and Allied Health Personnel, Untold Stories. Because nurses have lots of stories, and so do other allied health personnel, paramedics, and so forth. So
that's fantastic, and I wish you the best of luck on that and this book. And I'm actually going to share this book with a lot of my colleagues. And like I said earlier, everybody pick up a copy of this book. Also get one for your doctor. Get it to them, get it in their hands for them to realize what really goes on in the invisible realm, the universe. Once again, Scott's website is physiciansuntoldstories.com, and you can get his book, Physicians Untold Stories, Miraculous Experiences Doctors Are Hesitant to Share with Their Patients or Anyone. It's available on Amazon.com. Dr. Scott Kolbaba, I want to thank you very much for being on Spirit Talk this month. Any last words?
Chris, it's been a joy. I love to talk about the stories, love to talk about the book, and thanks for having me on.
Anytime. I appreciate it. This is Chris Fleming and Dr. Scott Kolbaba. You've been listening to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. I'll see you next month.